All right. So while folks trickle in, let's just get started. And I want to just start by introducing myself. Good to see everyone here. My name's Andrew Chen, and as you guys may know, I work at Andreessen Horowitz, which is one of the larger venture capital firms in investing across many industries, including Maven, which is hosting us for all of this today. And thank you, Goggin, and the rest of the team, the Maven team, for organizing everything. So anyway, it's good to see everyone. So what I wanted to cover today, and this is I think a really timely topic, just because we are in a period where there's a lot of career change. I think that's happening because of a number of reasons. Obviously there's a lot of just stuff happening in the industry. There's a lot of startups that are, making moves right now. But then, also frankly, it's exciting that there's a lot happening in these new sectors like AI or spatial computing or deep tech and like energy. Like there's people building new nuclear startups, and so all of that is really exciting. But I think one of the really common questions that I've been asking, having conversations about, and one of the things that many of you may be considering yourselves is is really just thinking through this question of what should I do next in my career, and in particular the form that where I'm often asked this is very, very tactical. Like I will get a call, and maybe you guys have made this call, and maybe sometimes your friends are calling you, and they'll say something like, hey, I have this job offer from this company. I just started talking to them, and all of a sudden I got this offer, and I'm just like, thinking about taking it. Like, should I take this or not? Okay. And that is a very, very common question that many of you, may have seen. And my core argument in this session, so this lightning talk, kind of, what I'm focused on, is that this framing of the question, the way that people, talk about, I have this job, should I take it, yes or no, is 100% the wrong framing. It is too tactical. It doesn't give you enough options. It doesn't give you the ability to evaluate anything. And so as a result, if we don't actually ask the right questions here, you might then sign up for a job, and then end up working 2, 3, or more years there in something that doesn't actually make sense for your career. And I think that that's really harmful, especially for many of us that are earlier in our careers, where taking 2 years out of the first 10 years out of your career is like a really, really big deal, right? So part of the question is, how do you actually make the right decisions? And so I'm going to tell just a quick story about my own personal experience in dealing with this, and hopefully it resonates with you. And I'll introduce a framework which we mentioned at the beginning of this lightning talk, which is the next job, in creating all of this. And then so I'll talk about that, and then I'll talk about the framework in a little bit more detail, and then we'll switch over to doing some Q&A. So my personal experience with this that I'll share is, I met Goggin actually from Maven a while ago, and it was at a period where I was actually just wrapping up my own startup, and I'd actually started a company, got it originally funded by Marc Andreessen and Ben Horowitz. It was through a vehicle actually called the Horowitz Andreessen Angel Fund. So this was before A16Z. And it wasn't working. We were building Facebook apps, and we were building, a bunch of things. And, it was sort of at the tail end of the Facebook platform. And, we still had a little money, but I was just tired. I think I'd been working on it for like 5 years. I was just ready to move on, and do something, new. I was fortunate enough to have a bunch of options for, where I would want to go. And so I ended up talking to a number of my founder friends, and some of them wanted me to join them. And so I ended up with a couple very, very different options. One option was I ended up spending a bunch of time with Drew Houston and the Dropbox team. And they were looking for somebody to run a bunch of their, to run their growth team there. I'd known Drew for a while and really loved the team, and obviously was a, almost daily user of their product. That was great. Um, I was, I'd gotten to know some of the executives at Uber, and they were trying to pull me into Uber, which was a very like sexy company at the time, very controversial also. I was trying to think about that. And then I had a couple other ones that are that maybe I'll work into the story. But the point was I was lucky enough to have a couple options, and they all had kind of different forms of compensation, different titles, different experiences. And it's just so hard to just compare, like, okay, well, you have this thing that is a little bit more risk, this thing that is more explosive, is maybe a little bit shinier, this other thing where you're getting paid more money. And like, how do you actually just compare, a bunch of these different, options at the same time? And so, for many of you, I think one of the first things I want to say is, I was, I had at least done the work to evaluate a few options at the same time, right? And so I think the first thing that I think a lot of folks do is when they're a passive, job candidate, they often will not really look at anything. And instead, what they'll do is they'll let somebody approach them. Then they'll get excited about, the one role that is put in front of them, and then they're being asked yes, no on this one thing. So step one, I'll just tell you kind of, first piece of advice on this is like, first, like, do not put yourself in that situation, because you have nothing to compare, right? And being able to compare is really at the foundation of this next job framework that I'm going to talk about. And then second, part of this is by being able to compare, by being able to figure out like what is the market of potential companies. I often tell people, if you're going to be on the market, like, you should ideally look for 2 or 3 months and actually try to have a lot of conversations. A lot of those conversations should be with people that maybe don't have specific roles that fit you, but instead just talk to companies that where you're passionate about the product, and roles that that might seem really interesting, and just sit down with people from those companies and just try to understand what it is that where they're trying to invest and where they want to build. Now, if you pull that off right, then you eventually get to a point where you have a few, ideally you have a few different, things to be able to compare. And then this is where for my story, I went to a very, very good friend of mine, Bubba Murarka, who was early Facebook guy. He actually worked for Sheryl Sandberg back in the day, on their BD team. And I started to just say, well, I have these like 3 options, and I just blurted them out. I was like, I could go here, I could go here, I could go here. And like, I was, he's a good friend, so very transparent with him. And I was like, here's the titles, here's the compensation, here's what they want me to do. Which one should I pick? And so this is where the framework comes in, which is to say, like, that is the wrong way to phrase the question, right? The right way to phrase the question is to answer a far harder question of like, what are you trying to get to? What is your next job? And the reason why I think that's a really important one, and I went so far as to actually write a blog post. So now I'm going to actually just share my screen, so that folks can see the blog post that I wrote, and I'll start to talk through some of it. Okay, great. All right. So I think you guys are just seeing my page. So I've been writing a blog, andrewchen.com, for a long time. And so this is one of the topics that I have been covering. So you can read it in a lot more detail on your own. But I want to just share kind of the middle part of this, which is, asking the question, what is your next job, and why can't you get it today? And that's kind of the key thing. And look, like, your next job might be 5 years from now. And so if you don't know where your life is going to be and what you're going to be in 5 years, that's totally fine. Like there's no problem to that. But what you want to do instead is you want to think a little bit probabilistically about what you might want to do in your next job. And so, for me, in the case of, I've been, working in startups for a while. My startup wasn't really working out. I knew that my next job, I probably, one option was going to be that like I was going to be a startup investor somehow. I was going to work in venture capital, which is obviously what I eventually ended up doing. I was also kind of open to the idea that I might start another company. Or the other version is maybe I would go join, like after going to a high growth startup, I might go to another one. Maybe I would really enjoy that experience. And then I also had kind of just some like random, odds and ends ideas of like being a blogger or, like something like what Eleni Rachiski has done actually. I look at that and I'm like, oh, that's pretty cool too. And so, I first want to encourage you to think probabilistically. Like you're not going to know what your next job is, and so instead, think about it as like there might be 3 or 4 options that are likely, and like maybe there's a couple percentages attached to each. And in particular, I would love for all of you to think about a couple variations of this, which is, what's the version of what you would want to do if you were completely financially secure and you could take the maximum amount of risk and follow your passion. Like what would you want to do, right? Like I think that should be that's one that should be on the list. I think that you should also put on the list one that maybe has a high degree of lifestyle kind of trade-off, where you're able to get a really great lifestyle, because that is something else that you might want to do in 5 years. I remember as someone in my 20s, I was, I thought like I was going to be a lot more hardcore that, through my whole career. And then, all of a sudden one day I'm, 41, and the appeal of eating ramen and sleeping under my desk doesn't have the romantic allure that it did when I was, 25. And so, I think that's another one that you should think about, which is, like what's something that emphasizes lifestyle. I think there's also another one, which is like more of the same, meaning like something that you're already doing and you're kind of progressively getting better. That's kind of like another, version. And then, the final one that's maybe worth thinking about is there a role that is sort of a stretch role? Maybe it's adjacent to your job. Maybe it's bigger than, your current job. But is there a stretch role that could kind of, that's very aspirational that you would want to do? And so for me, I had been I'd been a founder. I'd raised some money. I'd worked in venture capital like many years earlier. But what I decided was like my stretch goal was going to be to work in venture capital, because that was something that I could be really passionate about. And I'd already kind of dabbled. And so I was like, okay, I'm going to throw that like as my 50%, like that. I would love to do that. And I might start another company. I might do one of these other things. And then what happens is, I then want to ask you after that is, once you've identified your next job, again, probabilistically, there's an interesting question of like, well, why can't you do it today? Why can't you get it today? This is a fascinating question, because actually some people, the things that they say they want to do as their next job, they can actually already get today. They just have a psychological blockage, for it. And so sometimes it's like they've never been a manager and they want to have a management, like responsibility in their next job. And so they're like, oh man, I would love one day to run the, marketing function of a company. And sometimes like actually, folks just have imposter syndrome, and maybe they should just take the shortcut and go directly for their next job, almost like right away. For other folks, it's like, yeah, it is aspirational. And so then once you have that point of view, where you can apply this framework is then you can start to say, okay, fantastic. Now of the 3 options that I have in front of you, what are the, what is the next job that I should get that sets me up for this next job? Like then you actually have kind of an optimization function that gives you the ability to, prioritize, at all. And so, and part of this is like, being really frank about, so I'm going to go back to my deck here, my blog post here. Oftentimes, like, you just don't know, like, that next job isn't attainable. And it's because, maybe you've only worked at startups and you need kind of like a shiny role or two that adds credentialing, right? Or maybe you're in marketing and you want to become a PM and you're not yet close enough to the engineers. You kind of have some of these, reasons. And so I often ask these questions, which are, okay, well, what skills do you need? Is there a new network of people? Are there experiences that you need to demonstrate? What are mentors that you need? And to understand, all of these gaps. And if you're able to do that, and you know yourself really well, this is, by the way, also a place where having conversations with some of your, friends and colleagues that you trust, to be like, hey, I am, I'm in marketing right now. I'd love to be a PM. Like, what do I need? Right? Like, that is an amazing, like, if you can get somebody to give you an honest answer about that, that is absolutely amazing. And eventually you kind of build this plan. So, eventually you're able to basically say, okay, and this is where I was, which is, okay, I want to be a professional investor, but maybe, I feel like I have these gaps. And so for me, I'll just be super frank about it. I felt like in order to get a job at a place like Andreessen Horowitz, that probably I needed some kind of like shiny logo company somewhere in my resume, because I'd been doing like startup stuff and I was kind of like had a following on Twitter and things like that. But I sort of felt like to make it really work, it would be great if I had like a really shiny resume. And so that was a big part of it. And so I decided, actually, as part of this, so, going back to my friend, Bubba, is, I talked to Bubba a lot about this, and I was like, okay, like, I think actually the shiny resume thing, I'm not going to stay at Uber forever, but it's definitely the shiniest company. And so if I were to get this amazing logo, that would make me so much more attractive to founders. And as a result, I should prioritize that over compensation, over role, over, everything else. And so, so I ended up, going with Uber as a result. And that helped me a lot, because some of the other options that I had, frankly, paid me a lot more money. And so I felt like, I was going to give up a lot. So, maybe just to summarize, it's a big decision. All these things are very big decisions, but to summarize, I think for all of you that are thinking about, your next role, I basically argue that, number one, make sure you actually really think through and frankly work with former, colleagues and friends who can be honest with you on to talk about, like, what is your next thing, and make a list, because it's not going to be one thing. It's going to probably be, 3 or 4 things. Figure out what your gaps are. And again, that requires a lot of self-analysis, and maybe you work with an executive coach, maybe you work with, coworkers and other people. Figure out your gaps. Why can't you get the next role? And then go run a real process, talk to a lot of companies, interview a lot of places, and find the role that sets you up to maximize your chances at your next job. And so those are some of the things that I employed to get to A16Z. As you might imagine, there's not a lot of, venture capital jobs out there. And so I was very lucky to end up with, like, my, the job of my dreams, basically, following this framework. And I'm deeply grateful to Bubba Mirarka for teaching the framework to me. And we were able to employ it on this one. And he and I actually ended up basically, talking and working on this almost every day while I was in the process of, like, selling my company and my team, which was eventually acqui-hired to Uber. And I joined Uber, had a great time there, knew that I wasn't going to stay forever, but it was an amazing time. And then that set me up to go to A16Z. So I will stop there. And I know we're going to move to Q&A and take the last kind of, 10 minutes or so on that.
Cool. Hi, everyone. I'm Lonnie from Maven. If you had a question, you can post it in the Q&A at the bottom of your screen and also upvote the questions that are there so far. Since we only have a few minutes, we're just going to be selecting kind of the most upvoted ones. So to kick us off, first question for you, Andrew, is, oh, they're moving. People are upvoting fast. Okay.
Yes, yeah.
We have,
Please put in questions. Please upvote.
yeah,
We'll try to get through as many as we can. And Lonnie, I don't know. I mean, I don't know if we have to stop at 30. I could go longer also if that's
amazing. Okay, let's see. So let's kick it off with, how do you think about developing skills for your next job versus improving skills for your job today?
yeah. So this is a funny one because you would think that, of course, you have to do a good job today in order to get your next job. But like, actually, funny enough, that's often not true. Oftentimes, somebody who is, so we deal with this in venture capital all the time, which is somebody who's extremely self-promotional, for example, might be really, really good as a VC, but actually is not necessarily an amazing colleague, at a startup, right? Unless that's their job, right? And so, similarly, somebody who is an amazing, who knows that they want to be an engineering manager one day, might not be like need to be super focused on being an amazing individual contributor as an engineer. So I think if you know where you want to go, I think you should always kind of be oriented a little bit ahead, with the caveat, obviously, that you should make sure you're not generating a negative reference, for yourself, on these. And then I think I saw a question on this, which is there's actually I think a Q&A button, isn't that right, Lonnie, on the bottom of everybody's thing, so you can just click on the Q&A button, put your things in, and also there's a bunch of questions now that you can upload as well.
Awesome. Next question. In the current not so ideal market, would you approach the next job search differently?
Yeah. Well, I think no matter what, I think that you need to have a long-term orientation on building your career. A career is not just a 5-year thing. It's not just a 10-year thing. I mean, it's going to be, you're going to be doing it for most of your life, right? So think of it as it's like a, 30 or 40-year, endeavor for many of us. And so because of that, I think having this framework of, okay, yeah, what am I going to be doing, next or next like might actually, like, I think that's important. I think it's important to have a career strategy. And and I think as part of that also, I didn't write about any of this, but maybe it'll be a future blog post. I think you have to think about what your competitive advantage is, what your kind of personal moat, what your personal value prop is, and really develop it, because you are in competition with not just the people, in your city, but like in the digital age, really everybody, right? In that. And so I think orienting yourself towards not just where you want to go, but where you can differentially contribute to the ecosystem is important. That said, I would say, like, look, I think, the current market isn't ideal. And so because of that, I think a lot of this will take more time in the first few months to kind of get to create the three options to even be able to compare the options against each other. But I definitely still believe that having a long-term orientation is the right way to go, because our careers are just so long.
Cool. Looks like we've got some aspiring founders here on the call. If your next
Yes. Good.
job is starting your own company, what advice do you have for aspiring founders to evaluate their readiness to make the leap?
Yes. Yes. Yeah. So um I always tell people that, and maybe this is, for Gagan at Maven and myself and others that have, been involved in startups for a long time. I always encourage people to be a founder at least once in their career, because it is absolutely the fastest, most intense way to learn about yourself, about the market, to improve your skills than any normal, job out there. So I definitely encourage everyone to do it. In terms of readiness, I think that the biggest, question mark that I always have is, you need to be able to, number one, have some kind of, insight in the market, right? Oftentimes, if folks like don't have, if they don't have like a set of hobbies that they're doing, if they're not like nerding out on some like vertical area, or if they're not, working in an area that is generating a lot of interesting insights. Oftentimes they're creating startup ideas that are just, not very good. They're not very unique. And so I think that's kind of one major part. The second part, which is maybe a little bit counterintuitive, is that you have a huge advantage as especially a younger entrepreneur that's able to make what it is that you believe. And so what I mean by that is if you are a software engineer and you have an idea, that's fantastic. If you can't code, you know what's great? Like build a newsletter business, build a build a Shopify business, build something where you're able to iterate in your head. Or alternatively, yeah, then you have to find a partner, you have to find investors and so on. And that can be great too. But that's another big part. And then the last thing I'll say is I don't think there's ever like a good time to start a company. It's always going to be, it's sort of like, hey, when's a good time to completely destroy your life because you need to work 100 hours a week and your family and your spouse like thinks that you're too busy and all you can think about is your startup, like even if you should be on vacation, like when is a good time to do that? And it just turns out there's never a good time to do that. And so I just think that like if it's something that you want to do, it's better to do it earlier rather than later. And I think I saw Goggin unmute, so I feel like he wants to say something.
Oh, I only if you wanted me to. It was like a bit, so thanks. But I was just gonna add that I think being a founder is incredibly valuable, and even joining an early stage startup, they're the fastest ways to learn. They're not always the fastest way to get your next job. Um, Oftentimes it can go one way or the other, and so you shouldn't have because you will then get your next job, and only then will they realize how amazing you are and the skills you got from the startup if it doesn't work out. So in the event that your startup doesn't work out, I find that people may not get the best job right after that, but they climb very quickly in the company they joined. And so you'll sort of get a delayed benefit, but the people I know who've started companies, even ones that didn't work out, had incredible careers. It just took them an extra it took them a year into their company, their new company, their next job to actually get that hockey stick sort of improvement in their career.
Yeah, great point.
Cool. Okay, we have a couple more upvoted questions, so maybe we'll do two more, if you're okay with going a few minutes
Yep.
over.
Yeah,
Cool. Okay, so I guess you started off talking about this. What are some of the pitfalls that you feel that people often fall into when evaluating or deciding their
yeah.
role?
Yeah, I think I think most of the pitfalls are related to being too short term, because our careers are just so long, right? And so, I mean, it's amazing how many people I know that, I mean, by the way, if you go talk to any company, like successful company, and you talk to the founders, they will often tell you about, how I mean, at Uber, like there were people that were in the first 100 employees that, they were interns or whatever, and they were given offers, and their offers were $10,000 less than some other offer, and they went with the other offer just because of the concreteness of it. And that literally like cost them, whatever, $100 million later, right? And like, and it's just so hard to like, kind of contemplate this stuff. But I think people tend to be overly focused on like the exact dollar amount of offers, like in the short term, like kind of overvaluing that. I think a lot of people often fall into a trap of sort of chasing the shiny logo from the last generation as opposed to the thing that's going to be amazing, going forward, right? I think that's often, the case. I think you're almost always better off working for a company that's on the up and up, that's going to be building for the next generation, as opposed to a more senior job at kind of like a tier 2 company. Again, I think this is all, because if you work somewhere where there's a trajectory, again, you're just better off, but you have to wait for that trajectory to play out. I think that's really important. I mostly find that people seem to quit their jobs because of their manager, frankly. I mean, so I think in a lot of cases they are, people are overly, thinking about the company and they're thinking about, you know, again, the offer that's right in front of them and not thinking enough about the manager. You know, I often make the case in my, you know, venture capital career to say, hey, before you're going to invest in somebody, you better spend 10 hours with them, because you're signing up for, you know, 10 years of board meetings with these guys. You know, Gagan and I we're going to be talking for the next 10 years. Like, that's just how it's going to work. Right. And so, you know, Gagan better like me and vice versa. Right. I think that's important. And so in the same way, I think your direct manager is incredibly important. And people sort of de-emphasize that relative to like the shininess of the logo. And so I think, you know, I think a lot of these errors are really kind of, again, kind of long-term versus short-term. And then, you know, and then I think like maybe the final thing I'll say is that, you know, there is just kind of like a part of working somewhere that is just like a qualitative decision, and it comes from the heart. And I think actually you should trust your instinct. And if you have 3 options and you kind of feel like they're all kind of like not that good, and you're not like really that, you're kind of deciding between 3 B+ options and nothing really jumps out at you, I think it's important to actually like pass on all 3 and keep looking, even though it's extremely painful to do so. But it's like, I think your heart has to actually be in it. Otherwise, that's your heart telling you like, you know, you're going to work there, be upset about it, and then you're going to bounce in 12 months and you're going to feel shitty about the whole thing. So I think it's just better to, you know, to trust yourself.
Cool. Last question, which is kind of related to what you were just talking about, but we do have some folks interested in knowing, I think, about for you, what are some of your deal breakers, or what aspects of a job or a company are non-negotiables for you?
Yeah. So, I mean, just for myself, you know, I kind of felt like I over time came to understand that I really enjoy jobs that are very horizontal rather than like really deep. So I enjoy jobs that are kind of external facing into the industry, jobs where I can kind of like dabble and learn about a lot of different things, rather than, you know, I mean, I enjoyed my time at Uber, but I know way too much about like transportation regulation around the world, which is not something I ever thought I would be interested in, nor do I ever want to be interested in again. And that's an example of like just going really deep on something, you know, in everything rideshare. And so, you know, so that was sort of one important part is, you know, that part, you know. And I think like for me, writing, teaching, you know, doing podcasts, doing social media, doing all of that is such an important part that if I just wouldn't go anywhere that didn't allow me to do that. You know, it's just one of my like passions, it turns out. So, you know, so I think that's quite important. I want to work with people that I feel like are that I can really, you know, that are people that like I would want to work with like for life. And I think I have that long-term orientation towards that, and I would love to like work with the same group of people like forever and ever. And so, you know, because of that, I want to, you know, like these were all important kind of considerations going into my venture capital career. And so, and then, you know, and then finally, like, yeah, I mean, you know, like I want to work with the best. Like, it's funny, I would say that venture capital is this way, but other things are also this way, where um, if you work in venture, but you are kind of working primarily on diamond in the rough companies, versus if you're able to work with some of the best companies and the best founders like Maven, then in a case like that, then even though it technically is the same job title, it's actually a completely different experience of what it's like to work in the industry. And so I just felt like I wanted to work somewhere where, you know, the best founders would be magnetically attracted to, you know, working with me. And so, you know, A16Z helps with that as well. And so that was also a major part of my consideration. So Lonnie, thank you so much for organizing this and helping with some of the questions, and appreciate everyone that's attended today.
Thanks, everyone. Thanks, Andrew. This was amazing.